Have you ever watched your parents celebrate someone else's achievement while yours gets a polite nod and a pat on the head? I used to think that was just how families worked until I realized some achievements apparently deserve Honda Civics, while others get secondhand congratulations. My name is Avery, and at 28, I've built a career most people would envy. I'm a licensed physical therapist specializing in sports medicine at Bellevue Rehabilitation Center, where I work with professional athletes including 3 current Seahawks players and 2 Sounders. My hands have guided million-dollar knees back to the field, and my treatment plans have saved careers that generate more revenue than most small businesses. The irony isn't lost on me that I heal people for a living while my own family wounds feel permanently tender. Growing up in our modern 4-bedroom house on Lake Washington, I always knew my twin brother Camden was special. Not because he was more talented or smarter, but because my parents, both Boeing engineers with methodical minds, had decided sometime around birth that his potential deserved investment while mine deserved management. They treated our identical genetics like a scientific experiment with predetermined variables, and somehow I became the control group while he got all the enhancements. The pattern started early and subtle. Camden's Little League gear was always name-brand Nike, while mine came from the clearance rack at Dick's Sporting Goods. His piano lessons were with the conservatory-trained instructor downtown, while I got the neighborhood teacher who charged half the price. When we both showed interest in coding in high school, he got the expensive summer camp at Microsoft while I got a library book and encouragement to figure it out yourself. My parents called it building character. I called it getting used to disappointment, but I adapted the way children do. I learned to celebrate my own victories quietly, to expect less fanfare, to find validation in the work itself rather than in recognition. When I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Washington with my Doctor of Physical Therapy degree, I told myself that my parents' modest dinner celebration was enough. After all, they'd attended the ceremony and taken photos. They'd even framed my diploma right next to Camden's bachelor's degree in computer science that hung in the exact same sized frame despite requiring 2 fewer years of study. The contrast became impossible to ignore 3 weeks ago when Camden finished his master's degree in software engineering. I was scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break, absently eating a turkey sandwich between patients, when the first photo appeared on my timeline. Camden, grinning like he'd won the lottery, holding a set of car keys attached to a Honda keychain. The caption from my mother read, "So proud of our Camden. Master's degree completed and ready to take on the world. Can't wait to see where this beautiful new car takes him. Proud mom. Sow's new car achievement." My turkey sandwich suddenly tasted like cardboard. I scrolled down to see more photos. Camden posing with a shiny silver 2024 Honda Civic. My parents beaming on either side of him like he'd just discovered the cure for cancer. The car gleamed in their driveway, its temporary license plate still crisp and new. $28,000 of gleaming validation, I discovered later, when I looked up the model online during my break between treating a torn ACL and a rotator cuff injury. The math was simple and devastating. Camden's master's degree, which he'd completed while working part-time at a tech startup, had earned him a brand new car. My doctorate, which required 4 years of undergraduate study, 4 years of doctoral coursework, 9 months of clinical rotations, and a national board examination, had earned me a gift card to Target and a dinner at Olive Garden. The disparity was so glaring that I actually laughed out loud in my treatment room startling my next patient who asked if everything was okay. That evening, I sat in my own car, a 2019 Toyota Corolla I'd bought myself with my signing bonus, in the parking lot of my apartment complex, staring at the photos again. My hands trembled slightly as I counted the hearts and congratulatory comments accumulating under my mother's post. 43 likes, 16 comments, all celebrating Camden's achievement and his beautiful new reward. I searched their Facebook pages for any mention of my graduation 3 years earlier and found one photo. Me in my cap and gown, no car in sight, with the caption, "Avery graduated today, proud of our hard-working girl." 12 likes, 4 comments, and no mention of the 6 years of intensive study or the Clinical Excellence Award I'd received. I called my mother that night, my voice carefully neutral as I congratulated her on Camden's achievement. She bubbled with excitement, detailing the surprise they'd planned, how they'd researched the perfect car for his new career, how practical and reliable Honda Civics were for young professionals. I listened to her enthusiasm and felt something cold settle in my chest, like ice forming over water that had been warm just moments before. "It's wonderful that you were able to do that for him," I said finally. "I'm curious, though. I don't remember getting a car when I finished my doctorate." The silence stretched for so long that I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had shifted to that carefully measured tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Avery, that's different. You were already established in your career. Camden is just starting out and we wanted to help him get on his feet." The explanation hung in the air like smoke, dissipating as quickly as it had formed. I was 25 when I graduated, starting my first job with student loans and the same uncertain future every new graduate faces. Camden was 26, already employed, and living rent-free in their basement while saving money. The logic didn't compute, but then again, it never had. The conversation with my mother ended with her suggesting we discuss it later when I was feeling more rational. That phrase echoed in my head for days, bouncing around my skull like a pinball while I worked with patients, each repetition adding weight to a growing realization that maybe I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt. Maybe the pattern I'd sensed my entire life was real and documented in $28,000 of gleaming evidence sitting in their driveway. I started paying attention differently after that phone call, approaching my family dynamics with the same analytical mind I used to assess muscle imbalances and movement patterns. If you've ever questioned whether your family's treatment feels uneven, you know the strange relief that comes with finally deciding to trust your own observations instead of dismissing them as sensitivity. The documentation began accidentally. 2 days after Camden's car celebration, my mother tagged both of us in a Facebook memory from 5 years ago, Camden's college graduation. I clicked through the album she'd created, my coffee growing cold as I scrolled through 47 photos of that day. Camden in his cap and gown, Camden with extended family, Camden cutting a graduation cake shaped like his diploma, Camden receiving a laptop, a watch, and an envelope that I now realized probably contained money. The photography was professional quality, clearly taken with their good camera, and the celebration had obviously been planned for weeks. I searched for photos from my own graduation ceremony 3 years later and found 8. 8 casual phone photos, most of them slightly blurry, taken in what appeared to be a hurried afterthought. No cake, no extended family, no carefully coordinated outfits. Just me in my doctoral regalia, standing awkwardly in their living room, holding the generic congratulations card they'd picked up from Walgreens that morning. The contrast was so stark that I actually saved both albums to my phone, creating a side-by-side comparison that felt like evidence in a case I was building against my own family. The breaking point came 3 weeks later at Camden's birthday dinner. My parents had chosen the Metropolitan Grill in downtown Bellevue, the kind of place where dinner for $4 costs what I spend on groceries in a month. I arrived directly from work, still wearing my physical therapy clinic scrubs under a blazer, and found them already seated in a booth with wrapped presents stacked on the empty chair like an altar to their golden son. Camden looked comfortable in his element, wearing a button-down shirt I'd never seen before and the Tag Heuer watch I now recognized from his graduation photos. The conversation flowed around topics I wasn't part of: his new job prospects, his car's impressive gas mileage, his plans to move out of their basement now that he had reliable transportation. I sat quietly, cutting my $60 steak into precise pieces and listening to my parents discuss their son's bright future with the enthusiasm of venture capitalists describing a promising startup. The gift opening ceremony began with dessert, and I watched Camden unwrap an Apple Watch, a leather portfolio for interviews, and a check for $2,000 to help with apartment deposits. The generosity was breathtaking and familiar. When my own birthday had passed 6 months earlier, I'd received a gift card to Nordstrom Rack and dinner at Red Robin. The math was becoming a pattern I couldn't ignore. Camden's celebrations consistently cost 4 to 5 times what mine did, and the effort invested was proportionally higher. "This is incredible," Camden said, fastening the Apple Watch around his wrist. "You guys really didn't have to do all this. We want to make sure you have everything you need to succeed," my father replied, his pride evident in every word. "You've worked so hard and we believe in your potential." The phrase hit me like a diagnosis I'd been avoiding. They believed in his potential. Past tense implied they'd already written off mine. I looked around the table at the 3 people who were supposed to love me unconditionally and realized that their love came with terms and conditions I'd never quite met. "I should probably head home," I said, reaching for my purse. "Early patient tomorrow." "Already?" my mother asked, though her attention was still focused on Camden adjusting his new watch. "We were going to order another round of drinks." I stood up, kissing each of them goodbye with the practiced affection of someone who'd learned to perform love even when it wasn't reciprocated equally. In the parking garage, I sat in my self-purchased Toyota and called my colleague Jennifer, the only person who'd ever consistently celebrated my achievements without reservation. "They bought him a car, Jen," I said when she answered. "A whole car, and when I asked about it, they called me unfair." "Wait, back up," she said, and I could hear her turning down her TV. "Start from the beginning. As I recounted the past month's revelations, including the photographic evidence and tonight's lavish birthday celebration, I heard my own voice describing a pattern that sounded even more absurd when spoken aloud. Jennifer listened without interrupting, and when I finished, her silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she was trying to find a diplomatic way to tell me I was overreacting. "Avery," she finally said, her voice careful but firm, "that's not normal. That's not even close to normal." Her validation hit me like warm water after hours in the cold, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for years, waiting for someone to confirm that my reality was real. The relief was overwhelming and terrifying because it meant I had to decide what to do with this confirmation. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I made a list. On one side, I documented every gift, celebration, and investment my parents had made in Camden over the past 5 years. On the other side, I listed my own. The disparity was mathematical and undeniable, approximately $15,000 in his favor, not counting the car. But more devastating than the money was the pattern of attention, effort, and belief that the numbers represented. I fell asleep staring at my phone screen, the two lists glowing in the darkness of my bedroom like a roadmap to a truth I'd been avoiding my entire life. The morning after Camden's birthday dinner, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes after a fever breaks. I lay in bed, staring at my list from the night before, the stark numerical evidence of 3 decades of unequal treatment, and felt something shift inside me like tectonic plates settling into a new formation. This wasn't sensitivity or jealousy. This was documentation of a pattern that had shaped my entire relationship with my family. I decided to test my theory with the scientific method my engineer parents had taught me. If favoritism was truly systematic rather than coincidental, it would show up in other areas beyond gifts and celebrations. I began what I privately called my family audit, approaching it with the same methodical attention I brought to developing treatment plans for my most complex patients. The evidence collection started with social media, and what I discovered was more devastating than I'd anticipated. My mother's Facebook page read like a shrine to Camden's achievements, with posts dating back 5 years documenting every promotion, every project milestone, every minor success with the enthusiasm of a personal publicist. Her posts about him averaged 3 per month, each accompanied by multiple photos and detailed captions expressing pride and excitement for his future. My own appearances on her social media were sparse and generic. I counted them, 12 posts over the same 5-year period, most of them obligatory birthday acknowledgments or family gathering photos where I happened to be present. Even when I'd received my certification in dry needling, a specialized technique that increased my patient success rates by 30%, the achievement went unmentioned despite my having shared the news during our weekly family dinner. The pattern extended to email communications, which I analyzed by searching my inbox for messages from my parents. Camden received regular check-ins about his career progress, job applications, and life decisions. The emails to him were substantive, offering advice, expressing confidence, and providing emotional support. My emails from them were primarily logistical, dinner confirmations, holiday schedules, and forwarded articles about health topics they thought might interest me professionally. But the most illuminating discovery came when I called my Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, under the pretense of catching up. Margaret had always been the family's unofficial historian, the one who remembered everyone's achievements and anniversary dates with encyclopedic precision. "I was just thinking about your graduation," I told her, steering the conversation carefully. "It feels like it was yesterday, but I guess it's been 3 years now." "Has it really been that long?" she mused. "I still remember how proud your parents were when they called to tell me about your doctorate. Though I have to admit I was a little surprised they didn't throw you a bigger celebration. When Camden finished his bachelor's degree, they rented out that banquet room at the country club and invited half the neighborhood. The revelation hit me like ice water. There had been a party for Camden's undergraduate degree, a party I'd somehow been excluded from or uninformed about. I managed to keep my voice level as I extracted more details: 60 guests, a catered dinner, a slideshow of his academic achievements, and speeches from family friends about his promising future. Meanwhile, My doctoral graduation had been commemorated with Olive Garden breadsticks and a single Facebook post. "I don't think I made it to that party," I said carefully. "Oh, you wouldn't have," Margaret replied without thinking. "It was during your clinical rotations, wasn't it? You were always so busy with your studies. Your parents said you probably wouldn't have time to attend anyway." The conversation ended with Margaret asking about my current patients and expressing admiration for my work with professional athletes, but I barely heard her words. I sat in my car outside the grocery store where I'd been planning to shop, gripping my phone and processing the fact that my parents had thrown a celebration for Camden that they'd never even mentioned to me. That weekend, I drove to their house for our usual family dinner, armed with a mental list of questions I needed answered. The three of them were gathered in the kitchen when I arrived, Camden showing them something on his phone while my mother stirred pasta sauce and my father opened a bottle of wine. The scene was so familiar and comfortable that I almost lost my resolve, but the memory of Margaret's casual revelation strengthened my determination. "I talked to Aunt Margaret this week," I said during dinner, my voice deliberately light. She mentioned Camden's graduation party at the country club. It sounded like it was really nice. The silence that followed was profound enough that I could hear the dishwasher cycling in the background. Camden looked confused, clearly unaware that I hadn't known about the party. My parents exchanged the kind of glance that married couples use to communicate entire conversations in a split second. "That was a small thing," my mother said finally. "Just a few family friends. We didn't think you'd be interested in all that fuss." "But you didn't ask me," I pointed out gently. "How could you know whether I'd be interested if you never mentioned it?" My father cleared his throat, his engineering mind clearly uncomfortable with the logical inconsistency I'd identified. "You were focused on your studies, and we didn't want to distract you with party planning." The explanation felt rehearsed, like they'd prepared for this conversation even though they'd hoped it would never happen. I looked around the table at these three people who'd shaped my understanding of my own worth and realized that they'd been managing my expectations my entire life, deciding what I deserved and what I might want without ever consulting me. "I would have wanted to celebrate Camden's achievement," I said quietly. "I would have wanted to be there to support him, even if I was busy with rotations. Just like I would have wanted you to celebrate mine the same way." The words hung in the air like a challenge nobody wanted to accept. Camden shifted uncomfortably in his chair, perhaps beginning to understand that his advantages had come at someone else's expense. My parents looked like they'd been caught in a mistake they'd spent years hoping would remain hidden. "We're proud of both of you," my mother said, her voice taking on that overly bright tone she used when she wanted to end uncomfortable conversations. "We just show it differently." But I wasn't willing to accept that explanation anymore. After 3 decades of different treatment that consistently favored the same person, I was finally ready to call it what it was: unfair. And more importantly, I was ready to decide what I wanted to do about it. The confrontation I'd been avoiding happened 3 days later when my mother called me at work. I was between patients reviewing notes for a Seahawks linebacker's rehabilitation protocol when her number appeared on my phone. Her voice carried that carefully modulated tone she used when she was trying to manage a situation she found inconvenient. "Your father and I have been talking about our conversation the other night," she began without preamble. "We think you're being unfair to your brother and to us. Camden has never complained about the support we've given you over the years." The accusation landed like a slap. I set down my pen and walked to my office window, looking out at the parking lot where my self-purchased Toyota sat among the BMWs and Mercedes of my colleagues who'd had family help with their career launches. "What support?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Can you give me specific examples?" "We paid for your undergraduate education," she said, as if this settled the matter entirely. "You paid for Camden's too," I replied. "And his graduate degree. And his car. And his apartment deposit money. I took out loans for my doctoral program and paid them back myself. That's different. Physical therapy school was your choice, and we didn't think it was our responsibility to fund career changes." The phrase hit me like a revelation wrapped in an insult. Career change. As if my doctoral degree was a whim rather than 6 years of intensive academic and clinical training. As if my work with professional athletes was a hobby rather than a specialized practice that required continuous education and certification maintenance. "It wasn't a career change," I said, my voice staying level through years of practice. "It was graduate school, the same as Camden's master's program. The only difference is that mine cost more and took longer." "Well, we can't help every decision you make," she replied, and I could hear her defensive irritation building. Camden has always been practical about his choices. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I created a comprehensive analysis of our family's educational investments, the kind of detailed breakdown I might prepare for a patient's insurance authorization. I spent 3 hours researching tuition costs, calculating loan interest, and documenting the financial reality of our respective academic journeys. The results were staggering. My parents had contributed $127,000 toward Camden's education across 6 years: undergraduate tuition, graduate school costs, living expenses, and various academic supplies and technology. For my education, they'd contributed $31,000, exactly the cost of my undergraduate degree and nothing more. I'd financed my doctoral program entirely through loans and part-time work, accumulating $89,000 in debt that I'd spent 3 years paying down. But the most revealing discovery came when I researched the earning potential in our respective fields. Physical therapists in my specialty earn an average starting salary of $68,000, with senior practitioners reaching $85,000. Software engineers with Camden's qualifications start at $95,000 and frequently earn 6 figures within 5 years. My parents had invested more money in the person who needed it least and would earn it back fastest, while leaving their daughter to struggle with debt in a helping profession that would never make her wealthy. Armed with this documentation, I requested a family meeting. I chose a Saturday afternoon when we could talk without the distractions of work or rushing to other commitments. I arrived at their house carrying a folder with printed spreadsheets, knowing that presenting data to 2 engineers would be more effective than emotional appeals. "I want to show you something," I said, spreading the financial analysis across their dining room table like evidence in a court case. "I've calculated the total investment you've made in each of your children's education and career development." Camden looked uncomfortable as I walked through the numbers, his face registering genuine surprise at the disparity. I'd included everything: tuition payments, the graduation car, birthday and holiday gifts, and even smaller items like the laptop upgrades and professional clothing allowances that had accumulated over years. "This doesn't feel right," Camden said quietly when I finished. I didn't know it was this uneven. But my parents' reaction was defensive rather than reflective. My father crossed his arms, his jaw set in the stubborn expression I'd learned to recognize as his "this conversation is over" stance. "Life isn't about equal distribution," he said. "Different children have different needs at different times. We've always tried to help where help was needed most. But that's not what this shows, I replied, pointing to the spreadsheets. This shows consistent investment in one child's potential and consistent neglect of the other's actual achievements. Camden's needs have been anticipated and funded. Mine have been ignored and minimized. My mother's face flushed with the angry embarrassment of someone caught in behavior they couldn't justify. You're being incredibly ungrateful, Avery. We raised you, housed you, fed you, loved you. Not everything can be measured in dollars. You're right, I said, my voice finally rising to match hers. Not everything can be measured in dollars, but respect can be measured in attention. Investment can be measured in effort. Belief can be measured in support. And by every single one of those metrics, I've received less than half of what Camden has. The silence that followed was thick with 30 years of unspoken truth. Camden stared at the spreadsheets with obvious discomfort, perhaps realizing for the first time that his advantages had been purchased with my disadvantages. My parents looked like defendants who'd just heard overwhelming evidence of their guilt. If you can't see how harmful this pattern has been, I continued, then you've proven exactly why I need to protect myself from it going forward. I gathered my papers and stood up, my hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was the one in control of this family dynamic, rather than the one scrambling to keep up with expectations I'd never been given the tools to meet. I'll be taking a break from family dinners and celebrations until you're ready to acknowledge what these numbers represent, I said. When you're prepared to treat your children with actual equality rather than just claiming you do, I'll be ready to rebuild our relationship. I walked out of their house and drove home in my self-purchased car, feeling simultaneously heartbroken and liberated. The truth was finally spoken, documented, and witnessed. Whatever happened next would be their choice, but I was done pretending that systematic inequality was love. 6 months have passed since I walked out of my parents' house carrying a folder full of evidence that changed everything. The silence from them lasted exactly 3 weeks before my mother began sending carefully worded text messages, testing the waters, asking about my work and my health with the cautious tone of someone approaching a recently wild animal. My father took longer, but eventually started forwarding me articles about physical therapy innovations with brief notes like, "Thought you might find this interesting." Camden surprised me the most. 2 days after our confrontation, he showed up at my apartment carrying coffee from our favorite shop and an expression I'd never seen before, genuine remorse mixed with uncomfortable enlightenment. He sat on my couch for 3 hours, asking questions about memories I'd thought only I had noticed, slowly piecing together the pattern that had been invisible to him as the beneficiary, but glaringly obvious to me as the one paying the cost. "I never realized," he said, staring into his coffee cup like it might contain answers. "I thought they were just proud of me. I didn't understand that meant they weren't proud of you the same way." That conversation led to others, and slowly, Camden and I began building the relationship we might have had if we hadn't been cast as competitors in our parents' affection. He started including me in his life decisions, asking for my perspective on job offers and apartment choices, treating me like the accomplished professional I'd always been, rather than the overlooked sister he'd been trained to see me as. The transformation in my daily life was remarkable. Without the weekly family dinners that had consistently reinforced my secondary status, I had time and emotional energy for relationships that actually nourished me. I started attending Jennifer's monthly wine nights with her colleague friends, joining a hiking group for medical professionals, and even dating someone I met through the Seahawks organization, a sports psychologist who appreciated both my expertise and my independence. More importantly, I began celebrating my own achievements with the enthusiasm I'd always craved from my family. When I received my certification in manual therapy last month, I didn't wait for anyone else to acknowledge it. I bought myself a bottle of champagne, posted about it on social media, and took myself to dinner at the same expensive restaurant where Camden had received his birthday celebration. The meal tasted like freedom, seasoned with self-respect. My parents' attempts at reconciliation began in earnest after Camden apparently had several conversations with them about what he'd learned. My mother's first real apology came via email, a carefully crafted message acknowledging that they'd perhaps not been as attentive to your achievements as they deserved. It was a start, but I'd learned not to accept half measures disguised as full accountability. I waited 2 months before agreeing to meet them for coffee, neutral territory where I could leave if the conversation became another exercise in deflection and blame shifting. They looked older, somehow smaller, sitting across from me at the cafe table. My mother's usual polished confidence seemed dimmed, and my father's engineering certainty had been replaced by uncertain glances between us. "We've been thinking a lot about what you showed us," my father began, his voice lacking its usual authority. "The numbers don't lie, and we can see how our actions must have felt from your perspective." "It wasn't about feelings," I replied gently but firmly. "It was about facts, measurable, documented differences in investment, attention, and support that shaped 30 years of family dynamics." My mother reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. "We want to do better. We want to find a way to repair this relationship, if you're willing to let us try." The conversation that followed was the most honest one we'd ever had. They admitted to assumptions they'd made about my resilience, my independence, my supposed lack of need for support. They acknowledged that they'd treated Camden's potential as more valuable than my proven achievements. Most importantly, they agreed to concrete changes, equal financial support for future endeavors, equal celebration of accomplishments, and regular family meetings where concerns could be addressed openly rather than festering in silence. The healing isn't complete. Trust rebuilt after 3 decades takes time, but the foundation has shifted to something more solid. My last birthday was celebrated with the same enthusiasm they'd always shown Camden, complete with a surprise party, thoughtful gifts, and genuine recognition of my professional success. When I mentioned casually that I'd been considering pursuing my PhD in sports medicine, they immediately started researching programs and offering to help with application costs. Camden and I have become allies rather than competitors, and watching him advocate for equal treatment has been one of the most healing parts of this entire experience. He's learned to share space in conversations, to redirect attention when our parents slip back into old patterns, and to celebrate my victories with the same excitement he'd always received for his own. The most profound change, though, has been in my relationship with myself. I no longer wait for external validation to know my own worth. I've learned to trust my perceptions, to document what matters, and to demand the respect I deserve rather than hoping someone will eventually choose to give it to me. My self-purchased car feels like freedom on wheels, and my self-financed achievements feel more valuable than anything that could have been handed to me. If you're reading this and recognizing patterns in your own family, trust what you're seeing. Document what matters to you. The truth has a way of becoming undeniable when it's written down in black and white, and you deserve relationships built on actual equality rather than just promises of love that don't translate into equitable action. Some families need crisis to change, and mine was no exception. But change is possible when people are willing to face uncomfortable truths and do the work to rebuild from a foundation of genuine respect. Your achievements deserve celebration, your needs deserve attention, and your voice deserves to be heard with the same consideration given to everyone else around the table. The most beautiful gift you can give yourself is a life where your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it,